Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Saskatchewan, through isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying small-town horror stories. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Saskatchewan, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Evan Mercer, and this happened when I was 29 during my first winter as a grain inspector in rural Saskatchewan. I took the job because I wanted distance. From people, from noise, from a life that felt like it was closing in on me. The prairies promised quiet, endless white fields, honest work. That promise was a lie. I was assigned to small towns most people don't even bother naming out loud. Places connected by gravel grid roads and ruled by the weather. My job was simple: inspect grain elevators, log moisture levels, and move on. No one warned me about the roads, not the way they twist when the snow comes down sideways, or how easily you can lose your sense of direction when everything looks the same. The first time I noticed him, I was driving near an abandoned elevator just outside a town with fewer than 300 people. A man stood at the edge of the road, facing away from me. No car, no footprints, just standing there, perfectly still, as if he'd been waiting for something or someone. I told myself it was nothing. In Saskatchewan, that's how you survive. By convincing yourself everything is normal. I didn't stop the truck. I slowed just enough to get a better look, my headlights washing over the man's back. He wore a long, dark coat that looked too thin for the cold, hanging off him like it didn't quite belong. No hat, no hood. The temperature was well below freezing, the kind that burns your lungs when you breathe. Yet he didn't flinch. As I passed him, something prickled at the base of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I checked my side mirror. He had turned his head, not his body. Just his head twisting far enough that I could see part of his face in profile. His neck bent at an angle that made my stomach tighten. People don't move like that naturally. His eyes were dark, sunken, and fixed on my truck with an intensity that felt personal, like he recognized me. I drove on, telling myself it was just a local. Maybe someone waiting for a ride, maybe drunk, maybe unwell. But when I glanced in the mirror again, less than 5 seconds later, the road behind me was empty. No man, no tracks, nothing but untouched snow stretching for miles. That was the moment the quiet stopped feeling peaceful. I didn't report it. That's something I regret now. At the time, it felt stupid. How do you explain a man who vanishes into clean snow? Instead, I drove straight back to town and finished my paperwork at the motel lobby, hands still stiff from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The wind scraped against the building, making the windows creak like they were being tested from the outside. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, listening. No knock, no handle turning. Just the sound of someone standing there, close enough that I imagined I could hear their breathing through the door. After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved on. The next morning, I asked the motel owner, a woman named Carol, if anyone had been wandering the halls late at night. Her smile faded when I described the man. "You saw him on the grid road, didn't you?" she asked quietly. When I nodded, She looked away and said, "People around here don't pick him up, and they don't stop." That was the first time I realized this wasn't just my experience. Carol finally told me what everyone else avoided saying. Over burnt coffee in the empty breakfast area, she explained that drivers had been seeing the man for decades. Always on grain roads, always in winter, always alone. Some said he used to be a railway worker who froze to death after getting lost during a blizzard. Others believed he was something older, something that learned how to look human just well enough to be mistaken at a distance. "What happens if someone stops?" I asked. Carol didn't answer right away. She just stared at the steam rising from her mug. "Cars get found," she said finally. "Engines cold, doors open, no blood, no signs of a struggle, just no driver." That day, I tried to leave town early, but the weather turned without warning. Snow came down hard, swallowing the road within minutes. Visibility dropped to nothing. My GPS lost signal, then froze completely. And that's when I saw him again. Standing in the middle of the road this time, facing me, smiling, not a friendly smile, not even a human one. It was stretched too wide, like he'd practiced it by watching other people do it and never quite learned where to stop. I slammed the brakes, but the truck kept sliding straight toward him. The truck fishtailed hard, tires screaming as they lost grip on the ice-packed road. For a split second, I was sure I was going to hit him. I braced for the impact, the thud of a body, the sickening stop, but it never came. The truck slid past where he stood, spinning almost sideways before I wrestled it back under control. When I looked ahead again, the road was empty. I pulled over, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Snow blasted against the windshield, but through it, I could see something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not leading away from the road, but stopping inches from my driver's side door. I stayed inside for nearly an hour, engine running, afraid to step out. My phone buzzed once with a missed call from an unknown number, then lost signal again. When the storm finally eased enough for me to drive, I followed the faint outlines of fence posts back toward town. That night, I found fresh frost on the inside of my motel window. Perfect handprints pressed into the glass from the outside. Someone had been standing there, watching me sleep. I decided to quit the next morning. I didn't care about contracts, penalties, or explanations. I packed my truck before sunrise, refusing to look out the window while I did. Carol was waiting at the front desk, like she knew I'd made the decision. "He won't follow you past the town limits," she said. "They never do." That should have comforted me. It didn't. As I drove out, the sky burned pale gray, the land stretching empty in every direction. I watched the ditches, the fence lines, the snowbanks. Everywhere he could appear. Nothing happened. Mile after mile passed, and my breathing finally slowed. Then I saw movement in the rearview mirror. Far behind me, standing at the edge of the road, was the man in the dark coat. He didn't chase the truck. He didn't wave. He just raised one hand slowly, fingers bending in a gesture that wasn't a goodbye. It was an invitation. I crossed the town limit sign moments later. When I looked again, he was gone. I still drive for work. But I never take grain roads in winter anymore. Because sometimes, in my mirrors, I still see someone standing very still, waiting for me to stop. I thought leaving Saskatchewan would end it. I took a job closer to the city, surrounded by traffic, lights, and people. Things that were supposed to drown out fear. For a while, it worked. Months passed without incident, and the memory of the grain roads softened, like a bad dream losing its edges. Then winter came again. One evening, I stopped for gas on the outskirts of town. The place was busy, engines humming, people talking loudly. I went inside to pay, feeling almost normal, until the cashier asked, "You drive the white pickup, right?" I nodded. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There's someone standing by it?" My chest tightened as I turned toward the window. Through the glass, beyond the glow of fluorescent lights, I saw a familiar dark shape at the far edge of the lot. Same coat, same stillness. Snow untouched around his feet. When I rushed outside, he was gone. No footprints, no marks. Just my truck, ticking as it cooled. That night, my phone rang at 3:17 a.m. The screen showed no number. I answered without thinking. All I heard was wind, and beneath it, slow breathing, too close to be coming from anywhere else. After that call, I stopped sleeping. Every sound felt deliberate. Every shadow seemed placed just out of sight. I started checking my mirrors obsessively, even on crowded streets. Especially on crowded streets, because that's where he liked to remind me he could still find me. The worst part wasn't seeing him. It was realizing he never appeared the same way twice. Sometimes he was older, sometimes thinner. Once, I swore his coat was different. Longer, like it had grown with him, or maybe he'd grown into it. I went back to the motel town one last time, desperate for answers. Carol was gone. The building was boarded up, windows dark. A handwritten notice on the doors said the property had been closed due to ongoing incidents. Behind the motel, near the old service road, I found something half buried in snow. A rusted railway lantern. Inside the glass, etched faintly with a knife, was a name. Evan. My name. That's when I understood the truth. He didn't follow roads, he followed people. And once he learns you, he never forgets. I didn't take the lantern with me. I couldn't. Touching it already felt like agreeing to something I didn't understand. I left it where it was and drove away with my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice just to breathe. That night, I dreamed of the grain roads. Not the way they look on maps, but the way they feel. Endless, looping, impossible to escape. In the dream, I was driving, headlights barely cutting through the dark, when my engine died. Silence swallowed everything. Then I saw him standing ahead of me, closer than he'd ever been before. He spoke for the first time. "You stopped once," he said, his voice layered, like several people speaking through the same mouth. That was enough. I woke up gasping, my room freezing cold despite the heater running. Frost webbed across the inside of my bedroom window, thick and deliberate, as if traced by fingers. On the glass, written backwards so I could read it from inside, was a single word: waiting. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after that, because deep down, I knew something terrible was coming, not fast, not violent, but patient, just like him. It's been 3 years since I last saw him. That's what I tell people. The truth is more complicated. I don't see him anymore because I don't need to. Every winter, or when the snow comes down heavy and the roads disappear, I feel him closer. Not outside, inside the pauses between my thoughts. I've stopped driving long distances. I've stopped taking unfamiliar routes. I plan my life around avoiding places where stopping might be necessary. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch my reflection in a dark window and feel a flash of panic. For just a second, my smile looks too wide, my eyes too hollow, like something is practicing how to wear my face. I understand now why the cars were found empty, why there was no struggle. He doesn't take you all at once. He waits. He walks with you. And one day, When the road is quiet and the snow is deep, you realize you're the one standing still, watching someone else drive past, wondering if they'll stop, and hoping they don't. My name is Caleb Hargreave, and this happened when I was 34. During the winter, I took a temporary job as a municipal records clerk in a small Saskatchewan town that barely showed up on maps. I wasn't supposed to stay long. 6 months, maybe less. Just enough time to pay off some debt and move on. That town had a problem no one talked about directly. One house. It sat at the edge of town, just past the last street light, where pavement gave up and gravel took over. A 2-story farmhouse, white paint peeling, windows always dark. It had been listed and relisted for decades. Cheap, then cheaper, then almost free. Still, no one bought it. My job involved property records, tax files, old sale documents. That's how I first noticed something was wrong. The house had changed owners dozens of times on paper, but no one had ever lived there longer than a few weeks. Some names ended abruptly. Others had notes scribbled beside them. Moved suddenly, left town, status unknown. The locals called it the waiting house. And before winter ended, I understood why. I asked about the house casually at first. That's how you're supposed to do it in small towns, never directly, over coffee, during paperwork. As if it didn't matter. People reacted the same way every time. A pause, a glance away, then a subject change. Except for Marjorie, an older woman who'd worked at the town office longer than anyone else. When I mentioned the address, her hand stopped moving over her keyboard. "That place doesn't like being owned," she said quietly. I laughed, assuming she was joking. She didn't smile. She told me the house was built before the town officially existed, that families moved in full of plans, renovations, children, gardens, and left behind furniture, food in cupboards, even pets, always in winter, always suddenly. "What happens to them?" I asked. Marjorie leaned closer. "Nothing at first," she said. "That's the problem." That same week, a letter crossed my desk. A transfer of ownership. Someone had finally bought the house. The name on the form made my stomach tighten. It was mine. I don't remember signing anything. But the keys were already waiting for me. I tried to fix the mistake. That's what I told myself, at least. I went through every form, every digital record, every scanned document tied to that address. Nothing was forged. Nothing was altered. My signature appeared where it shouldn't have been, clean and unmistakable, dated weeks before I'd even asked about the house. When I confronted Marjorie, she didn't look surprised. "It always chooses someone who's already here," she said. "Someone who belongs just enough." I refused the keys at first. I went home to my rental, packed my things, and decided I'd leave town the next morning. That night, the power went out during a snowstorm. No heat, no phone signal. By morning, the roads were closed. A truck was waiting outside. My truck. Parked in front of the house. I stood on the porch, staring at it, my breath fogging the air. The door behind me creaked open on its own, slow and patient, as if the house was tired of waiting. Inside, the air was warm. Too warm. Like it had been expecting me for a long time. Living there felt less like moving in and more like stepping into someone else's routine. The furniture wasn't dusty. The cupboards were stocked with food I didn't remember buying. Brands I preferred, right down to the cheap coffee I drank every morning. Even my spare winter coat hung by the door, damp as if recently used. The house made sounds at night. Not the usual creaks of old wood settling, but purposeful movements. Footsteps above me when I was downstairs. Drawers sliding shut on their own. Once, I heard a chair scrape across the floor, slow and careful, as if whoever moved it was trying not to be heard. I told myself it was stress, isolation. Prairie winters do strange things to people. But then I noticed the photos. They lined the upstairs hallway, framed, neatly arranged. Families, couples, single men and women, all standing in the living room, smiling stiffly at the camera. Every frame ended the same way, an empty doorway behind them. And in the glass of each photo, faint but undeniable, a reflection of someone standing just out of sight, watching, waiting. By the second week, I realized the house was learning me. It started with small things. Books I'd never owned appearing on the shelves, dishes in the sink arranged exactly how I liked them. Even the thermostat adjusting itself to my preferred temperature. At first I felt comforted. Finally, a home that understood me. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, like the wind brushing through the cracks in the siding. They called my name when no one else was around, echoing from the walls. Caleb, it would murmur. Always gentle, never urgent, as if coaxing me to stay a little longer. I tried leaving. Once I packed my car, ready to escape the creeping familiarity. The snowstorm outside slowed my progress, but even when the roads cleared, I found I couldn't start the truck. The engine wouldn't turn over. By nightfall, I was back on the porch, keys in hand, still trying to resist. The house had won. It didn't need force, it just needed patience. I stopped asking questions after that. The house seemed to feed off my confusion. Each morning I woke to objects shifted slightly, an armchair facing a different way, a coat missing from the rack, a window unlocked that I remembered closing. By evening, it had all returned to its correct place. I wasn't alone. I knew that the house could watch me. Sometimes I'd catch movement in the corner of my eye, shadows flitting down hallways, the faint reflection of a figure in a window that should have been empty. One night, I followed it. Slowly, down the staircase, through the long hallway lined with framed photos. At the end, the house was waiting. Not in any physical form, but in every creak of the floorboards, every draft curling around me. I could feel it pressing close, like a pulse inside the walls themselves. It didn't want to scare me. It wanted me to stay, to be part of it, forever. By the third week, I no longer noticed the cold. The house had made the winter irrelevant, but that warmth came with a cost. I stopped leaving the rooms I used most. I avoided the upstairs hallway entirely. The photographs seemed to multiply, new faces appearing overnight. People I didn't recognize, smiling stiffly in empty doorways. Sometimes, I swore one of the figures looked like me. Sleep became impossible. I heard voices whispering secrets in the walls, fragments of conversations I didn't remember having. Once, I woke to the sound of soft tapping on the window, rhythmic and deliberate. Outside, snow had piled higher than my knees, yet there were footprints, small, deliberate steps leading to the porch and then stopping. I tried reasoning with the house. I screamed at it. Nothing changed. It didn't respond to anger or fear, only patience. It waited for me to accept it, for me to let it in completely. By that night, I realized the house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and it knew me. I tried leaving again, packed my car under the pretense of business in the next town. Every object I touched inside seemed to resist me. Clothing slipping from my hands, books falling from shelves, doors swinging shut behind me. Even the snow outside worked against me. Tracks I made walking to the truck disappeared as if the house itself had erased them. That night, I heard the laughter. Soft, slow, deliberate, not human. It came from the kitchen, echoing through the walls. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was terrified of ignoring it. I followed the sound to the basement door, which I hadn't opened since moving in. My hands shook as I turned the knob. Darkness spilled upward, cold and alive. The whispers stopped as I descended, replaced by a single rhythmic heartbeat. And at the bottom, in the dim light of a hanging bulb, I saw the first visitor. Not human, not fully animal. Something old and patient, standing in the shadows and smiling. I can't explain what I saw in the basement. The figure didn't move like a person. It shimmered, flickered, as if it existed between layers of reality. Its face was human enough to make me hesitate, but the edges were wrong, blurred, impossible. And yet, it smiled at me. The same unnerving, patient smile I'd glimpsed in the photographs. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape, but my legs refused. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing against me like the house itself was holding me in place. Then I noticed the walls. They weren't solid. Faces pressed against the plaster from the inside, silent, staring, mouths opening in a frozen scream. The basement wasn't a basement. It was a collection of every person the house had ever claimed. And now it wanted me to join them. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and scrambled upstairs. The door slammed behind me, locking itself. I was trapped. But the house whispered again, calmly, insistently, almost lovingly. Stay forever. I don't know how long I stayed there, or if stayed even applies anymore. Days, nights. They blurred together. The house no longer seemed like walls and wood. It was a living, breathing organism. It adapted to my thoughts, to my fears, to my routines. Sometimes I hear voices outside the windows, people laughing, calling my name, asking if I want to leave. I know better now. They're not real. They're echoes, bait for the curious. The house doesn't need anyone outside. I've stopped trying to leave. It's easier that way. I wake, I eat. I move from room to room, watched by eyes in frames, faces in plaster. And sometimes, when the moonlight hits just right, I catch a reflection in a window that isn't mine. Someone else, smiling too wide, standing just behind me. The house waits, and I wait with it. Forever. If anyone ever drives past the old 2-story farmhouse on the edge of that Saskatchewan town, don't look too closely. Some houses never sell. My name is Lydia Carver, and this happened when I was 22, working a summer job at a small-town library in northern Saskatchewan. I had always loved quiet places, but nothing in my life prepared me for the darkness that hides along Weaver's Bridge, a rickety wooden span over a creek on the outskirts of town. Locals didn't talk about it much, except to warn tourists to avoid the road at night. They called it haunted, cursed, or worse, watched. I didn't believe them until that night. I was walking home after closing the library. The sun had already disappeared behind distant trees, and a mist rose from the creek, curling over the bridge. Something in the fog moved. I froze. A shape emerged, tall, pale, impossibly thin, with dark eyes that reflected the dim moonlight. It didn't walk. It hovered, just above the boards, as if the bridge itself rejected its weight. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, but my legs refused to move. And then it spoke. Not words, just a hum, low and penetrating, vibrating through the wood into my very bones. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the freezing creek, and scrambled to the edge of the road. My phone had no signal, the mist consuming everything beyond a few meters. The figure floated closer, moving impossibly smooth, as if it was part of the fog itself. I tried to call out, but my voice failed me. My breath came in ragged gasps. It tilted its head, watching me silently, and the humming grew louder, deep, resonant, almost intelligent. I swear it was testing me. Then I noticed the boards beneath it. Where its feet, or whatever passed for feet, hovered, the wood seemed to rot instantly, splintering and blackening as if burned by invisible fire. I tore myself away and ran, not daring to look back. Every nerve in my body screamed that it was following me, though the bridge behind me was empty when I glanced. That night, when I finally reached my small apartment, I found scratches across my front door, long, deliberate, claw-like, spelling no word I could recognize. The next day, I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination. The mist, the darkness, the fatigue. It all made sense. But when I mentioned Weaver's Bridge to a coworker, her face went pale. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the library windows as if something might be listening. I froze. She explained that the bridge had a long, grim history. Decades ago, a construction worker named Samuel Weaver had died during its building, falling into the creek during a sudden winter storm. Since then, people reported a pale figure hovering above the bridge, appearing to those walking alone at night. Drivers swore their engines stalled near it. Pedestrians claimed they felt invisible hands on their shoulders. I laughed nervously, but a chill ran down my spine. Later that evening, I had to cross the bridge again to get home. Mist clung to the planks, curling around my ankles. My steps echoed, too loud in the silence. And then I saw it. The same pale, floating figure, watching. It hadn't moved since last night. I froze, my backpack heavy on my shoulders. The figure tilted its head, the fog swirling around it like smoke in a cold wind. My instincts screamed to run, but my feet stayed rooted. Then it moved, not toward me, but along the bridge. Slowly, deliberately. Its motion was unnatural, jerking in ways a human body could not. Each step, or hover, sent ripples through the mist, warping the light from the distant moon. I noticed something else. The air smelled like damp earth and decayed wood, but beneath it, a hint of iron. Blood. I stumbled backward, slipping on the wet boards, my fingers scraping along the splintered surface. When I looked up, it was closer, tilting its head, observing me like a predator studying prey. My lungs burned. My mind raced. I sprinted across the remaining length of the bridge, hearing the soft, unnatural hum behind me, growing louder as if it were laughing. By the time I reached solid ground, the fog swallowed it completely. But when I glanced back, the boards beneath the mist were blackened as if scorched. After that night, I avoided Weaver's Bridge entirely. I took longer routes, stayed indoors after sunset, and tried to convince myself it was over. But the figure didn't stay confined to the bridge. It found me. At first, it was subtle. Shadows flickering across my bedroom wall. The faint, low hum I thought was my refrigerator. Then objects began moving, papers sliding across my desk, books falling off shelves, my backpack zipped open when I hadn't touched it. I started noticing the faint sound of footsteps in my apartment hallway, slow, rhythmic, matching my heartbeat. One night, I woke to see it in the corner of my room, floating, pale, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It didn't speak. It didn't move closer. It simply stared. And then, almost imperceptibly, it smiled. I realized something terrifying. It wasn't waiting for me to cross the bridge anymore. It was waiting for me to give up, to accept that it could follow me anywhere. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bridge, blackened and fog-drenched, and the pale figure hovering silently, waiting. My phone rang in the middle of the night sometimes, but when I answered, there was nothing, just that low hum resonating through the receiver. I tried leaving town, driving long hours away, but even then, I felt it. In the rearview mirror, mist curling at the edges, a shadow hovering just behind me. My GPS would glitch, taking me toward roads that led back toward the bridge. It was relentless, patient. One night, I returned to the library to retrieve some records for my job. I thought familiarity might comfort me. But as I passed the front doors, I felt it. The unmistakable hum vibrating through the ground, through my bones. And there, outside the library, standing just beyond the lamplight, it waited. Floating above the ground, tilting its head, silently humming, like a predator confident that its prey could not escape. By the fourth week, the presence had become inescapable. It no longer waited just at night. It appeared in the corners of my vision during the day, lingering at library shelves, in empty alleyways, even in reflections of the glass doors. Each time I saw it, the same low hum accompanied it, like the pulse of the bridge itself. I started researching the bridge's history obsessively. Local records, newspaper clippings, even old diaries of town founders. Every account pointed to a pattern. Those who saw the figure alone tended to vanish, move away, or go mad within months. The bridge wasn't just haunted, it was a trap. A sentinel for something older, feeding on attention, fear, and isolation. One evening, I crossed the bridge during daylight, thinking exposure might help. But mist rolled in faster than natural weather could allow, thick and curling, swallowing the sunlight. And there it was, floating above the planks, closer than before, tilting its head, humming, patient. I realized with a sickening certainty, it didn't need darkness. It needed me. By this point, I couldn't trust my own senses. Sounds of splintering wood followed me even on solid ground. I would glance at a doorway, thinking I'd left it empty, and see a flicker of pale skin just out of focus. The humming grew louder in quiet moments, in libraries, in my apartment, always just behind me, a constant reminder that the phantom had tethered itself to my life. One night, I decided to confront it. I returned to the bridge under a crescent moon, mist clinging to the boards. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the wood. The figure hovered before me, silent, unmoving, its eyes reflecting moonlight like black mirrors. I tried speaking, asking why it followed me, pleading for freedom. The hum responded, low and resonant, vibrating through the wood. Then it leaned closer, and for the first time, I understood. It wasn't malicious. Not entirely. It was lonely, waiting for someone to acknowledge it, to stay. And I wanted nothing more than to flee. I didn't run that night. I stood on the bridge, the mist swirling thick around me, the hum vibrating through every bone in my body. The phantom drifted closer, tilting its head, eyes unblinking. I noticed now it wasn't just watching. It was studying. Every movement I made, every breath, every twitch of my fingers, it cataloged. Then the bridge shifted. The wood groaned and warped beneath my feet, forming shapes, faces, hands, silhouettes of past victims frozen mid-step. I realized the bridge itself was alive, feeding on fear and attention. The figure pointed, or something like a gesture, and the faces turned toward me. Screams echoed, faint at first, then louder, piercing, filling the mist. I staggered backward, my mind screaming to leave, but the fog coiled around me, soft as silk, yet impossible to break. I felt it brush against my skin, cold and wet, almost gentle. And then it spoke. Not in words, but a thought that resonated directly inside my mind. Stay and join us. I woke hours later on solid ground, shivering, covered in frost and mud. The bridge behind me appeared normal, empty, silent, mundane. Yet I knew it was watching. I knew it remembered. Since that night, I've never crossed Weaver's Bridge alone again. I avoid the roads nearby, even in daylight. I feel the phantom in the corner of my vision, in reflections, in quiet, empty streets. Sometimes I hear the hum in my apartment, just faint enough to make me freeze. I know now it doesn't need to harm me to claim me. The bridge, the phantom, they've tethered themselves to my fear, my attention. And every time I think I'm safe, I feel a pulse, low and resonant, reminding me that it is patient, eternal. If you ever drive past Weaver's Bridge at night, beware. The mist hides more than water, and some phantoms don't just haunt bridges, they follow you home. My name is Ethan Ross, and this happened when I was 19, working as a seasonal courier for a remote Saskatchewan town during the autumn harvest. Most roads were gravel, and the sun set early, leaving long shadows across empty fields. That's when I first heard about Dead Man's Hollow, a low, narrow valley just off the highway, notorious for strange disappearances and ghostly sightings. I laughed it off. Stories of glowing lanterns and wandering spirits were campfire tales for tourists. Until I drove through it on a foggy evening, delivering a late shipment to a farm at the edge of the hollow. The fog rolled in, thick and fast, blurring the road, swallowing the headlights of my truck. Then I saw it, a dim, flickering light hovering above the gravel. At first, I thought it was a lantern hung from a post, but it moved, slowly, floating just above the road, drifting closer to me. It was pale, almost human-shaped, yet its glow was unnatural, eerie, like the light was feeding off something unseen. I slowed my truck, heart hammering. The lantern hovered in the center of the road, flickering with unnatural consistency. I called out, thinking maybe a farmer had left it behind, but the sound of my own voice was swallowed by the fog. The closer I got, the colder the air became. Frost formed along the edges of the windshield despite the mild autumn temperatures. The lantern didn't flicker like fire. It glowed steadily, almost pulsating with a heartbeat. My instinct screamed to turn around, but the fog behind me had thickened, cutting off any clear path back. Then I noticed something chilling, a shadow behind the lantern, not cast by the light, but moving in tandem with it, taller and wider than any human. My truck slowed to a crawl. The shadow tilted its head, almost like it was inspecting me, waiting to see if I would stop. I realized at that moment that this wasn't a prank. The hollow wasn't empty, and the lantern wasn't just light. It was a lure. I should have turned the truck around. Every instinct told me to press the accelerator and escape the hollow. But the lantern began drifting away, slowly moving off the road and toward a narrow dirt path cutting through the fog. Against my better judgment, I followed. The tires crunched softly as the truck left the gravel road, the headlights revealing crooked trees and tall grass bent as if something heavy had passed through recently. The lantern stayed just far enough ahead, never letting me get close, yet never disappearing. As I drove deeper, the radio crackled to life with distorted whispers, voices layered over one another, repeating the same phrase again and again. "You found it." I slammed the radio off, but the whispers continued, now echoing inside my head. The path led down into the hollow, where the fog thickened and the air smelled damp and metallic. That's when I saw them, old wooden crosses half buried in the ground, broken lanterns hanging from branches, and tire tracks that ended abruptly, as if vehicles had simply vanished. The lantern finally stopped near a clearing at the bottom of the hollow. My engine stalled without warning, plunging everything into silence. The fog parted just enough to reveal a collapsed shack and a deep pit in the center of the clearing, surrounded by old chains and rusted hooks. The lantern hovered above the pit, glowing brighter than before. Then the shadow detached from the light. It stretched upward, forming the outline of a man. Long limbs, no face, just a hollow darkness where eyes should have been. I couldn't move. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my chest, forcing shallow breaths. The figure raised an arm and pointed toward the pit. Images flooded my mind, people following the lantern, stepping closer, disappearing into the darkness below. The truth hit me hard. The lantern guided the lost, and the hollow kept them. Somehow, I forced my eyes shut and whispered a prayer. The lantern flickered violently, the shadow recoiled, and my truck roared back to life. I didn't look back as I reversed blindly, escaping the hollow by pure instinct. I didn't stop driving until the fog thinned and the road widened again. My hands were numb on the steering wheel, my heart still pounding as if it hadn't realized the danger was over. I told myself it was done, that whatever lived in the hollow couldn't follow me beyond its borders. But then I noticed the glow. It was faint at first, barely visible in the side mirror. A soft, amber flicker bouncing gently, keeping pace no matter how fast I drove. The lantern, still there, still watching. I pressed harder on the gas, the speedometer climbing, yet the distance between us never changed. The radio clicked on by itself again, this time playing an old, distorted song that sounded decades out of place. Between the crackles of static, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, matching the rhythm of my racing pulse. When I reached the edge of town, the street lights flickered as I passed beneath them, one by one going dark. That's when I realized the truth. The hollow hadn't let me go. It had marked me. I reached my driveway just before dawn, the sky turning a dull gray that offered no comfort. The lantern's glow vanished the moment I cut the engine, leaving only silence and my own shaky breathing. I sat there for a long time, afraid to step out, afraid of what I might see waiting beyond the headlights. Nothing happened. No glow, no shadow. Eventually, exhaustion won. I convinced myself it was over. The daylight had broken whatever hold the hollow had on me. Weeks passed. Life returned to normal, or at least close enough that I could pretend. But every now and then, late at night, I'd notice a soft flicker outside my window. Just for a second. Just long enough to remind me. They found an abandoned truck near Dead Man's Hollow last winter. Engine cold, doors open, no driver. The police said the owner must have wandered off into the fog. Sometimes, when the nights are quiet, I swear I can see a lantern moving slowly down the road toward my house. Patient, waiting for the moment I decide to follow. I stopped sleeping after that. Every night felt like an extended wait, my body tense, ears straining for a sound that never fully arrived. The flicker outside my window became more frequent. Never bright, never clear, but always there. When I tried to look directly at it, the glow would fade, as if it knew when it was being watched. One evening, I found mud on my porch. Wet, dark footprints leading from the road straight to my front door. They were long and narrow, spaced too far apart to belong to someone walking normally. I scrubbed them away with shaking hands, repeating to myself that there was a logical explanation. There had to be. That night, the radio in my kitchen turned on by itself. Static filled the room, followed by the same whisper I'd heard in the hollow. "You found it." That was when I understood the final rule of the lantern. It doesn't chase, it waits. And the longer you resist, the closer it brings the hollow to you. The road appeared outside my house a week later. Not literally, but it felt that way. The fog rolled in thick and low, swallowing the trees, the fences, even the stars. When I stepped onto my porch, I couldn't see past the end of the driveway. The world had narrowed into something familiar and wrong. Then the lantern emerged from the fog, closer than ever before. No shadow this time, no whispers. Just the soft, steady glow, waiting patiently at the edge of the road. I shut the door and locked it, backing away until my shoulders hit the wall. The light didn't move. It didn't need to. They say Dead Man's Hollow only appears to those who are already lost. I used to believe I escaped it. Now I know better. Because some nights, when the fog is heavy and the world goes quiet, I feel the road calling me back. And one night soon, I'm afraid I'll finally answer. I tried to leave after that. Packed a bag, called in sick to work, told myself that distance would break whatever hold the hollow had on me. The car started without trouble, but the moment I reached the end of my driveway, the fog thickened until the headlights felt useless. The road ahead looked wrong, too narrow, bending in ways I didn't recognize. That was when the lantern appeared again. Not ahead of me, but reflected in my windshield, glowing softly from the back seat. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The light pulsed gently, almost reassuring, like it was reminding me of something we both knew. The radio crackled to life, static giving way to a familiar voice, my own, whispering directions I didn't remember recording. Turn back. My hands moved without permission. The car reversed. The fog thinned. My house reappeared, waiting patiently, as if it had never expected me to succeed. I realized then that the hollow doesn't let you leave once it decides you belong to it. I live differently now. I don't go out at night. I don't follow unfamiliar roads. I keep the curtains closed when the fog rolls in. But none of it feels like protection. Only delay. Last week, I found the lantern in my shed, sitting on the workbench, unlit, cold to the touch. I don't remember bringing it there. I don't remember ever touching it at all. Yet somehow, it felt familiar in my hands, like it had always been waiting for me to accept it. I put it back where I found it and locked the door. That night, the glow returned outside my window, brighter than ever, steady and patient. No whispers this time, no warnings, just an understanding. Dead Man's Hollow doesn't need the road anymore. It doesn't need the fog. Because once you've seen the lantern, once it's learned your shape, the hollow comes with you. And sooner or later, you carry the light for it. My name is Jacob Turner, and this happened when I was 18, working the harvest season in a small Saskatchewan town. Everyone knew Willow Creek for its quiet fields and isolated farms. But one farm on the outskirts had a reputation that made locals uneasy. They called it the Holloway Farm, abandoned for decades. But people swore someone still worked the fields at night. One evening, I was delivering supplies to neighboring farms after sunset when I noticed movement in the distance. A solitary figure trudged across the wheat, wearing an old, wide-brimmed hat. His pace was slow but deliberate, and he didn't respond to my shouts or the truck horn. Something about him made my skin crawl. He moved like a puppet, stiff and unnatural. I stopped the truck, straining to see in the dim light. The figure paused, then slowly raised a hand. Not a greeting, but a gesture that made my stomach twist. It wasn't human, or at least, it didn't seem entirely alive. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was a farmer returning late, tired from the fields. But as I drove closer, the air grew unnaturally cold. Frost formed on the edges of my windshield despite the warm autumn evening. The figure didn't move like a human. It glided, almost floating above the wheat. My headlights caught his face, or what should have been a face. Hollow eyes reflected no light, and his skin was grayish, stretched too tightly across his bones. His mouth opened in a silent scream, but no sound came out. I froze, unable to move the truck forward or backward. Then I heard it. A low creak, like the groan of old wood. The wheat around him shifted unnaturally, bending as though some invisible weight pressed down. The figure lifted its arm, pointing straight at me. I felt a suffocating sense of dread, as if the farm itself was alive and warning me to leave. I backed the truck up slowly, my hands trembling. The figure didn't move, but the wheat around him whispered as if alive, brushing against one another in an unnatural rhythm. The low creak became a faint chorus, like old machinery straining under impossible weight. I realized then that the farm wasn't abandoned. Something, or someone, was still working it. But it wasn't human. The figure began moving again, slowly pacing along the edge of the field, its gaze fixed on me. I felt eyes everywhere, from the rusted barn, the hollowed silos, even the distant tree line. Every shadow seemed to twitch. I tried to call for help on my phone, but there was no signal. The air grew thick, heavy, almost viscous. I felt a presence pressing against my chest, demanding I stay, demanding attention. Panic clawed at me, but I knew the moment I fled, the farm would remember my trespass. The figure raised both arms, pointing toward the barn. And that's when I noticed the faint glow inside the windows. Against my better judgment, I approached the barn, curiosity and terror warring in my mind. The closer I got, the louder the creaking became, like the groaning of 1,000 old doors moving in unison. My boots sank slightly into the damp earth, each step echoing through the still evening air. Peering inside, I could see the glow more clearly. It wasn't fire. It was the faint shimmer of lanterns, hung carefully along the barn walls. Shadows danced across the wooden beams, but they weren't human. Thin, elongated forms moved in slow, methodical patterns, mimicking farming tasks I could barely recognize. The silent farmer stood at the center, unmoving, watching. I realized then that this was no ordinary haunting. The farm itself had become a vessel, animated by something ancient, feeding off the labor, the fear, the attention of those who wandered too close. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. I couldn't leave fast enough, but I knew the farm would never let me go entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. Images of the farm, the silent farmer, and the elongated shadow figures haunted me relentlessly. Every creak of my floorboards sounded like the groan of the barn. Every gust of wind whispered through the wheat fields outside, carrying the faint hum of the farm's unnatural labor. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, but deep down, I knew better. I decided the next day I would return, not out of curiosity, but to understand what I had witnessed. Perhaps confronting it directly would offer answers, or at least closure. I drove back to Willow Creek as dusk settled, the road narrow and lined with skeletal trees. When I reached the Holloway farm, the field was empty, silent, almost inviting. The barn's glow was faint but unmistakable, pulsating in rhythm with something ancient. The figure appeared immediately, standing rigid at the edge of the wheat, motionless. I realized that leaving wasn't enough. The farm wanted acknowledgement. It wanted recognition. And now, I was drawn in. I parked my truck and stepped cautiously into the wheat. The stalks brushed my arms unnaturally, almost as if alive. The figure didn't approach, but the barn's glow intensified, shadows stretching out toward me like fingers. I felt a pull, an invisible tether, dragging me forward. Then I heard the soft, deliberate creaking of the barn door. It swung open slowly, revealing a dim interior, alive with movement. The elongated shadow figures were at work again, performing tasks I couldn't comprehend. Their motions were precise, mechanical, yet imbued with a strange, silent malice. The silent farmer remained in the center, watching me. His hollow eyes reflected the lantern light, unblinking, patient. I realized then that this farm didn't just haunt. You became a part of it the moment it acknowledged you. The whispers started, soft and sibilant. Join, work, stay. My blood ran cold as I understood. This was a trap, and I had already stepped inside. I forced myself forward, every step heavy with dread. The wheat brushed against my chest and face, whispering like voices in the dark. The barn loomed larger with each step, shadows stretching and warping unnaturally. I could hear faint whispers rising from the elongated figures inside. A low chorus of demands. Work, stay, join us. As I stepped onto the barn's threshold, the lanterns flared brighter, revealing tools and objects floating midair, moving as though an invisible hand guided them. The figures inside mimicked farming tasks, their motions stiff but eerily precise, creating a hypnotic rhythm. The silent farmer turned toward me, its hollow eyes gleaming, and raised a hand slowly, beckoning me closer. I realized then that the farm itself was alive, feeding not on life, but on acknowledgement, attention, and fear. My every thought, every heartbeat seemed to pulse in sync with the lanterns. I wanted to flee, but the pull, the invisible tether, was stronger than my fear. I stepped inside, boots sinking into damp earth, wheat stalks tangling around my legs. The figures inside didn't acknowledge me individually, yet I could feel their attention pressing, invasive, almost sentient. The silent farmer stood in the center, unmoving, but its gaze followed my every motion. Then, the barn seemed to breathe. The wooden beams groaned, dust falling from rafters, shadows shifting unnaturally along the walls. A soft chant rose from the figures, unintelligible but insistent, urging me closer to the center of the barn. I realized the farm didn't just want my presence. It wanted my participation. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but the tether wouldn't release. My hands trembled as I reached toward a floating tool, compelled to mimic the figure's actions. The lanterns pulsed brighter, the whispers growing louder, and I understood with horror that if I fully obeyed, I could become one of them. Another lost soul feeding the Holloway Farm's dark hunger. Panic overwhelmed me. My hands shook violently as I fumbled, trying to step back from the floating tools and the ghostly figures. The silent farmer's hollow eyes bored into mine, unblinking, patient, and impossible to ignore. The chant intensified, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from the walls, the floor, even the air itself. I tried to run, but the tether pulled me forward, my feet dragging through the wet earth of the barn floor. Every movement I made seemed anticipated, like the farm itself was alive, corralling me. The elongated figures shifted toward me, their motions deliberate, silent, yet filled with intent. I could see now that each figure had once been a visitor, trapped by the farm's pull, doomed to labor for eternity. The lanterns flared suddenly, illuminating every shadow. The silent farmer raised a hand slowly, pointing directly at me. My chest tightened, my breath caught. I understood that leaving wasn't an option. The Holloway farm didn't release its prey. Summoning every ounce of courage, I leapt back toward the barn door, crashing through the wheat stalks as if the earth itself tried to slow me. The lanterns pulsed violently, shadows stretching to block my escape. But somehow, I burst into the cold night air. The barn behind me went silent instantly. The figures frozen mid-motion, the lanterns dimming to a faint flicker. I ran to my truck, fumbling with the keys, and drove without looking back. The Holloway farm receded into darkness. Yet I could feel its gaze, the tether lingering like a cold hand on my shoulder. Since that night, I've avoided Willow Creek entirely. I don't drive near the fields, I don't speak of it, and I never, ever approach farms that seem too quiet. The silent farmer still waits, patient, eternal behind that barn door. And I know that any who enter will become part of its living nightmare, forced to labor under the gaze of something that should not exist. My name is Lucas Reed, and this happened the night I was driving back home from a late shift in a small Saskatchewan town. Maple Road was known for being desolate. Long stretches of cracked asphalt flanked by dense woods, with little to no traffic. Locals whispered about strange sightings, particularly a hitchhiker who appeared on foggy nights and vanished without a trace. I didn't believe in ghosts. I laughed at the stories, until that night. Driving slowly through a thick patch of fog, I saw her standing by the roadside. Wet hair plastered to her face, pale skin glowing faintly under my headlights. She wore a tattered coat and clutched a small bag, her eyes wide and pleading. Something about her seemed wrong. Against my better judgment, I stopped. She climbed into the passenger seat silently, offering a shaky smile but saying nothing. The instant she settled in, the temperature in the truck plummeted. The heat couldn't keep the cold away. I tried to make small talk, but she didn't respond. Her eyes stared blankly ahead, though I felt them on me constantly, unblinking, heavy with something I couldn't name. Every twist of the road made my stomach knot tighter. The radio crackled with static, though I hadn't touched it, and the air smelled faintly of decay. Curiosity and fear battled inside me, and I couldn't stop glancing at her. That's when I noticed her bag. It was old, leather worn thin, and it seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. I shivered. Something about her presence warped the air, slowed time, made every sound echo unnaturally. As I drove further down the winding road, the fog thickened. The trees leaned toward the truck, their branches scratching against the metal roof. Then I saw it. A shadow in the rearview mirror, moving toward me, but there was no one outside. My heart pounded, and I realized that she wasn't alone. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over, but the hitchhiker's silent stare held me in place. The fog outside thickened, swirling like smoke, making the road ahead almost disappear entirely. I felt the hairs on my neck rise as the temperature continued to drop, my breath fogging in the air inside the truck. Then I heard it, a faint whisper from her, barely audible but unmistakable. Turn. The voice was hollow, yet insistent, and it wasn't coming from her lips. It seemed to echo from every corner of the truck. I slammed on the brakes, but the truck didn't respond as expected. It slid slightly on the slick asphalt, moving in a slow, unnatural rhythm. Glancing to the side, her eyes now reflected something impossible. Darkness. Not just a shadow, but a void, stretching infinitely. My stomach churned, and I realized with horror that whatever had entered my truck with her wasn't human. The whispering grew louder, forming multiple voices, overlapping and echoing. Follow, stay, join. My heart raced uncontrollably, and I tried to reason with myself. This had to be a hallucination, a trick of the fog and exhaustion. But the hitchhiker remained unnervingly still, her gaze locked on mine, void black eyes pulsating faintly. Suddenly, I noticed the bag on her lap shifting, writhing slightly, as if alive. A low hum seemed to emanate from it, vibrating through the truck's frame. My hands fumbled to lock the doors, but they wouldn't respond. The handles jammed as though gripped by invisible fingers. Panic consumed me. The road stretched endlessly, each bend revealing nothing but more fog and shadow. Then I saw headlights in the distance, or what I thought were headlights. But they weren't moving naturally. They floated, shifting sideways, like something hovering over the road, following me. I realized then that my night on Maple Road had just become a chase I might never escape. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the truck skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. The hitchhiker's eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking, and the bag on her lap pulsed with an eerie, faint glow. I tried to shake off the creeping dread, telling myself it was just exhaustion. But the whispers had grown into an unrelenting chorus. They weren't coming from her mouth. They filled the truck, bouncing off the ceiling and dashboard. The floating lights outside mirrored every turn I took. Each time I swerved, the lights adjusted, gliding silently alongside the road. My stomach churned as I realized that whatever was chasing me wasn't bound by physics or sanity. It was aware. It was alive. Then the hitchhiker spoke softly this time, words laced with an unnatural resonance. "Soon, you'll belong here." My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed to get rid of her, to escape. But I felt powerless, trapped in the unnatural rhythm of the road, the fog, and her presence. I tried to open the door to push her out, but my hands passed through her arm as if she weren't solid. Panic erupted in my chest. The floating lights outside grew closer, casting distorted shadows across the interior of the truck. The fog pressed against the window like a living entity, and the chorus of whispers grew louder, merging into a single commanding voice. "Stay. Forever." My eyes darted to the bag. It seemed to writhe, shifting in her lap as if something inside was alive, stretching and straining against its leather shell. A cold pressure pressed down on me, weightless but unrelenting, forcing me to stare, to acknowledge it. I slammed my eyes shut, wishing I could wake from this nightmare. When I opened them, the road ahead was empty. The fog was thinning, and the lights had vanished. The hitchhiker sat silently, expressionless, but the pulse from the bag remained, slow and steady, reminding me that this nightmare wasn't over. It had only begun. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to convince myself I was safe now that the fog had thinned. But the hitchhiker's presence was suffocating, unyielding. Her eyes, empty voids, followed me with an intensity that made my chest ache. The bag on her lap pulsed faster, as though sensing my fear, feeding on it. The road stretched endlessly, yet something in the air shifted. The trees leaned closer, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, scraping against the fog. Shadows began moving independently, stretching unnaturally across the asphalt. A low, guttural hum began rising from the bag, vibrating through the floorboards, through my bones. I realized with terror that the lights I'd thought vanished were returning, not behind me, but on the road ahead, gliding in formation, blocking every possible escape. The hitchhiker's lips moved silently, yet her voice echoed in my mind. This road, it's mine now, and soon, you will be mine too. The truck slowed involuntarily, as though some unseen force pressed against the brakes. I pounded on the pedal, but the acceleration was sluggish, my control slipping. The whispers erupted into a deafening cacophony, overlapping voices repeating, "Stay, stay, belong," over and over. My mind spun, fear tightening like a noose around my skull. The hitchhiker reached toward the dashboard, her hand passing through it effortlessly, brushing the controls. Every light flickered violently. The engine growled unnaturally, and the fog outside swirled into solid shapes that seemed to stretch for miles. I screamed in panic, jerking the wheel, but the road warped in front of me. The lights glided closer, the shadows inside the fog coiling and twisting like living snakes. I realized the horrifying truth. She wasn't alone. She was a herald, a guide for something beyond comprehension, and it was already here, closing in. My fight for survival had only just begun. My hands shook violently as I tried to steer the truck through the dense fog that now seemed alive, pressing against the metal and glass. The whispers had become deafening. 1,000 voices calling my name, weaving around me, penetrating my mind. The hitchhiker's face remained expressionless, but her eyes pulsed with an unnatural light, syncing with the rhythm of the bag on her lap. Then I saw it. Figures emerging from the fog, floating above the road, countless pale silhouettes reaching with long, clawed fingers. They mirrored the hitchhiker's movements, closing the distance impossibly fast. My heart raced, and I realized I was trapped. Every attempt to flee was futile. The road itself seemed to twist and elongate, bending reality in a way I couldn't comprehend. The hitchhiker leaned toward me, voice now echoing in my head. There is no leaving, only joining. The pulsing bag glowed brighter, casting light on her twisted reflection in the rearview mirror. Desperation overtook me. I slammed my foot to the floor, tires squealing on the slick asphalt. The fog tore apart as I barreled forward, but the figures kept pace, floating silently, relentless. The hitchhiker whispered one last time, "You cannot escape." Her lips didn't move, yet the words echoed in my mind, and the bag pulsed violently as though mocking me. Suddenly, the fog began to thin. The lights ahead, the floating shadows, and the whispering voices disappeared as quickly as they had come. My heart was still hammering as I drove past the familiar edges of Maple Road, the woods returning to their quiet stillness. I glanced to the passenger seat. She was gone. The bag had vanished, leaving only an icy emptiness. I never spoke of that night, and I never drive Maple Road after dark. Some roads are haunted, and some hitchhikers are not what they appear. The vanishing hitchhiker waits for the curious, and I learned the hard way that curiosity can be deadly. My name is Ethan McCall, and this happened during the late summer when I was hiking near Red Pine, a dense forest in northern Saskatchewan. Locals warned me never to enter after dark, claiming the woods were alive in ways one couldn't imagine. I laughed at the superstition, until the day I realized some warnings are born from truth, not fear. I was following a narrow trail, the sun sinking behind the tall pines, casting long, unnatural shadows. Birds had gone silent, and the forest seemed to breathe around me, the wind whispering through the leaves in strange, almost human patterns. Every step I took was met with sudden snaps of twigs behind me, though I saw no one. As dusk fell, a soft whispering began, barely audible at first, like someone muttering my name from far away. I froze, straining to locate it. The sound seemed to move with me, flitting between trees, closer with every heartbeat. That's when I noticed the small figures, pale, shadow-like, lurking just beyond the tree line. I tried to convince myself it was just imagination, the whispering a trick of fatigue and fading daylight. But the air grew unnaturally cold, and the forest seemed to close in around me. Every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate, every shadow shifted unnaturally. My heart hammered as I realized I wasn't alone. Then I heard a distinct phrase, carried clearly on the wind. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was soft, almost melodic, but heavy with malice. I turned in all directions, but the path behind me was empty. The trail ahead, though familiar, now seemed foreign. The trees bending toward me, branches reaching like skeletal fingers. A sudden crack of wood echoed nearby, and I glimpsed movement. More pale, shadowy figures darting between the trees, circling me silently. Panic surged, and I realized these woods weren't just haunted. They were predatory, alive with entities that watched, whispered, and waited for trespassers. I broke into a run, the trail twisting in ways I didn't recognize. Every step I took was accompanied by the soft, echoing whispers, repeating my name over and over. The shadowy figures darted between the trees, staying just out of reach, but always in my periphery. The forest seemed to pulse with life, branches stretching to block my escape, roots reaching out to trip me. I stumbled into a small clearing and paused, desperate for a moment to catch my breath. That's when I noticed something unsettling. The shadows weren't just moving. They were forming shapes, elongated human-like silhouettes that mirrored my movements. I felt eyes everywhere, from the gnarled trunks, the underbrush, even the mist curling near the forest floor. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end. A low, chilling voice echoed from the darkness, singular this time, commanding and cold. "You will not leave. Not tonight." Fear gripped me. Yet I knew I had to keep moving or become part of the forest forever. I ran blindly, the shadows following, the whispers now a chorus of indistinguishable voices. Every tree seemed alive, groaning and shifting as I passed. I tripped over exposed roots and fell hard onto damp earth. When I looked up, the clearing had vanished. The forest rearranged itself, twisting the path behind me into an impenetrable wall of darkness. The whispering grew louder, circling me from every direction. I caught glimpses of the figures, tall, pale, faceless, gliding instead of walking. They moved with intent, surrounding me in silence, punctuated only by my ragged breathing. Panic surged, my mind screaming for a solution. I noticed a faint light far ahead, a small glimmer between the trees. Desperation drove me toward it, but the shadows responded instantly, stretching toward me with unnatural speed. The forest was testing me, corralling me, deciding whether I would escape or become part of its whispered secrets. I forced myself to keep moving, following the faint glimmer of light, though every step felt like wading through invisible resistance. The whispers had multiplied, swirling around me, taunting, urging me to stop. The forest floor seemed to shift beneath my feet, roots snaking like serpents to trip me. Every glance over my shoulder revealed more shadowy figures, pale and faceless, mirroring my movements with unnerving precision. Suddenly, the glimmer resolved into a small cabin, abandoned and weathered, its windows dark. Yet a faint lantern light flickered inside. I ran toward it, hoping for refuge. But as I approached, I noticed that the forest behind me had grown impossibly dense, branches forming a wall that blocked the way back. The whispers intensified, now punctuated with urgent hisses. "Don't enter, or you'll belong." I hesitated, heart pounding. The cabin was my only hope, yet entering felt like walking straight into the forest's trap. With a trembling breath, I pushed the door open, unsure if I was about to survive or become another secret of the whispering woods. Inside the cabin, the air was heavy, musty, yet strangely still. I pressed my back against the wall, chest heaving, trying to make sense of the relentless whispers that seemed to seep through the wooden planks. The lantern flickered violently, casting long, writhing shadows across the floor. Shadows that didn't match anything in the room. I noticed old journals strewn across a table, pages yellowed and filled with scrawled warnings. The forest watches. It feeds on fear. Never stray after dusk. The entries described hikers and travelers who had vanished in these woods, all drawn by the same faint light I had followed. A sudden scraping at the window made me jump. I froze as a faceless figure pressed against the glass, its long, skeletal fingers tapping lightly. The whispering inside the cabin intensified, louder than ever, repeating, "Stay, stay, belong." I realized that the forest didn't just trap you outside. It reached in, claiming you completely. I backed away from the window, heart hammering, realizing that the forest itself was pressing against the cabin walls. The whispers became a deafening roar, echoing inside my skull, vibrating through my bones. Every shadow in the room stretched toward me, coiling like living tendrils, while the faint lantern light flickered violently, casting grotesque shapes on the wooden floor. I had to move. Stepping toward the door, I felt an invisible force resisting me, as though the forest itself had wrapped tendrils around my limbs. Outside, the shadowy figures multiplied, sliding along the trees with impossible speed. Each step I took forward felt like wading through invisible water, thick and suffocating, every heartbeat synced to the pulsing whispers. Then, in the dim light, I saw the largest figure yet, a towering, faceless entity, moving toward the cabin, its presence alone warping the air. The voice echoed clearly in my mind. "You belong to us now." Fear froze me, but I knew I had only one choice: to escape or be consumed entirely. I wrenched the door open, stumbling into the forest, the whispering immediately intensifying to a cacophony of voices screaming my name. The trees bent toward me, roots twisting, branches clawing like hands, while the pale, faceless figures glided silently but inexorably behind. Every instinct screamed to run faster, but the forest distorted the path ahead, elongating the distance, making escape feel impossible. The lantern inside the cabin flickered out behind me, and with it, the last glimmer of hope. The air grew heavier, colder, pressing on my chest as if trying to suffocate me. The largest entity moved closer, faceless head tilting unnaturally, observing, judging, claiming. My mind raced. Should I hide, fight, or keep running? Every choice felt like surrender. Finally, I spotted a faint light. What I hoped was the edge of the forest. Summoning every ounce of strength, I sprinted toward it, the whispers reaching a maddening crescendo. The forest was alive, sentient, and it would not release me easily. I ran blindly, branches lashing at my face and roots clawing at my feet. The whispers had grown into a deafening roar, overlapping voices repeating, "Stay, stay, belong," endlessly, rattling my nerves to their breaking point. The shadowy figures glided silently, closing in, circling me like predators. Yet I could never see where they began or ended. Ahead, the faint light flickered. The edge of the forest, or so I hoped. Every step toward it felt as if the forest itself resisted, elongating the trail, twisting the trees, reshaping the ground. I stumbled and fell, dirt and leaves filling my mouth. The largest faceless entity emerged from the darkness, its presence so oppressive I could barely breathe. It stretched impossibly tall, its silhouette blotting out the dim light I clung to. I screamed, pushing myself forward, the whispers clawing inside my skull. I realized the forest didn't want me dead. It wanted me transformed, claimed as one of its own. Escape was uncertain, but surrender was unthinkable. With a final burst of adrenaline, I lunged toward the faint light, bursting through the edge of the trees into an open field. The forest behind me remained alive, dark and pulsating, shadows stretching to the edge as if reaching out, whispering my name with hollow insistence. I collapsed onto the grass, gasping, my heart racing. When I looked back, the forest appeared normal, silent, as if nothing had been there. No figures, no whispers, no twisted paths, just ordinary trees bathed in moonlight. But I knew better. The forest hadn't let me go. It would always watch, waiting for the next unwary traveler to wander its haunted paths. I never returned to Red Pine, and I warn anyone who will listen. Some forests are alive. They remember. They feed. And the whispering woods of Red Pine are patient, eternal, and hungry. I escaped. But part of me will never leave that forest behind. As the shadows of Saskatchewan's small towns retreat into memory, one truth becomes undeniable. Terror often hides in the quietest corners, in roads less traveled, in forests that whisper, and in faces that vanish too quickly. From the chilling vanishing hitchhiker of Maple Road to the haunting whispers of Red Pine, each story is a testament to how ordinary lives can brush against the unimaginable, how curiosity can awaken horrors that linger long after the sun rises. These encounters were not legends, not campfire tales. They were real, documented experiences from those who lived to tell the story. Tonight, we have walked together through abandoned farmhouses, silent forests, shadow-haunted roads, and isolated towns where help could never reach. Each tale reminds us that darkness isn't just around the corner. It can follow, it can wait, and sometimes it never lets go. Thank you for watching. This was Dark Fears